Here to tell us more about the situation and what's going on in the region, we have Robert Bernstein. He is the founding chair of Human Rights Watch and a former chief executive and president of Random House. Robert Bernstein, good to have you with us on Bloomberg. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you explain, because I know that you also have a technological connection to what's going on in Egypt. You've got a blogger and well, you explain. Cyberdissidents.org is something you've been working on.
Cyberdissidents.org is a young organization founded by David Keyes. I've been working very much with him. His office is with mine. It's part of an organization that we're working on. And this has become very personal because David's chief blogger was a man named Karim Amir. And he was 4 years in prison because he insulted Mubarak or something like that. He got out of prison about 2 months ago. He wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal last week, and he's been missing for 3 or 4 days. David was talking to him a few hours before he was supposed to go into the square. I think he was in the line going into the square. David's been frantic. We've all been frantic. We've notified the Egyptian embassy. The State Department is aware of it. Mike Posner, who's in charge of human rights there, is aware of it. And the reason I'm talking about it first is, as we've all learned, I mean, this takes me back to square one when Natan Sharansky said if the only thing that kept him going for 9 years was that people were talking about him.
In the former Soviet Union, when he was in prison.
In the former Soviet Union. So we're back to square one in what is happening now. And
so you had no contact with the blogger that works for cyberdissidents.org?
For 3 days. The Egyptian embassy has been aware of it for 3 days.
What's their response been?
I don't think they've had a response.
And what is the U.S. State Department saying to you?
You'll have to ask David.
No response yet?
The last I heard is that they're working on it.
They're working on it.
Of course, there's a lot going on. I mean, I don't...
and what is the name of the blogger?
A-M-E-R. Karim Amir.
Amir. And so there's no news. And so is that endemic from your experience in looking at what's been going on in Egypt, indeed in other countries in the Middle East? Talk a little bit about whether this is part of a pattern or is this something that is an idiosyncrasy?
It's always a pattern of totalitarianism. It's always a pattern in countries where people can disappear or be arrested, and and we forget about them. Life is moving very fast. Things are happening all the time, all over the world. And one of the things that human rights organizations have to do more and more again, what's really happening is questionable whether the United States human rights organizations can be effective in different. Nobody wants to hear the United States people telling them what to do. The important thing, in my view, now in human rights is to empower people in the countries. They want human rights given a chance just as much as anybody else does. And the thing to do is try to empower them. And this is one of the men who was taking the ultimate risk of risking his life trying to do that in his own country. And there are many, many like him.
Should people in the United States particularly be afraid of what they see going on in Liberation Square or throughout Egypt right now, those protests?
I don't think so. I think there's risk in everything in life. Of course, it can go bad. Nobody knows that, though. But for the people there, you have to think of the Egyptians. The problem that the United States has had, of course, is that they've backed totalitarian governments which are against everything that they believe in. I mean,
the ultimate irony.
For instance, the stories we keep getting that don't get into the news. I'll tell you one about journalism.
You're going to save it for us because we're going to continue the conversation. We've got much more on Egypt, much more on the Middle East and human rights with Bob Bernstein. This is Taking Stock on Bloomberg. I'm Pimm. We're speaking about Egypt, human rights. We have Robert Bernstein. He is the founding chair of Human Rights Watch. He's also the former chief executive and president of Random House. Robert Bernstein, you were going to talk about journalists and the repressive, authoritarian nature, at least what you see in Egypt right now.
Well, I was going to move to Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia? All right.
And give you one as a journalist. A journalist in Saudi Arabia wrote a story criticizing the Saudi Electric Company. He was sentenced to 50 lashes to be given in front of the electric company and then to 6 months in jail. That's journalists. It wasn't covered at all. The only journalist who covered it was Abu Tomeh, the Arab Israeli And he said when he covered it, suppose an Israeli people had flogged a journalist in front of I thought, suppose Nick Kristof got flogged in front of the General Electric building. I mean, these stories ride by every day. A woman in Saudi Arabia got sentenced to 300 lashes and a year in jail she went to a building to fill out a form without a male escort. We just take it all for granted.
Is that because we have a double standard, that somehow people who live in different places, whose names we have difficulty pronouncing, somehow it's a different standard for them as it is for us? Why is it?
I don't think it's because we have a different standard. I think it's because those countries are very successful in keeping us out. I think they're very successful in not letting us see it. And I don't think we should blame it all on ourselves. I think we're trying. I think we have to I think in view of what's happening, big thing that has to happen is America has to solve this problem of not backing totalitarian states and then being in the position of trying to defend itself when everything that those states stand for is what we don't stand for.
How do we get into that kind of situation?
Well, in the Middle East, we need a commodity called oil. And the prevailing thinking has been that in order to get the oil, wouldn't you think we are going to sell $60 billion worth of arms to Saudi Arabia? They have a publishing industry that is publishing books, shipping them all over the world, all over the Arab world. And the story appeared that their books have been used in England, in Muslim schools in England, in which they call Jews monkeys and pigs. This is being taught to all the little kids. And that brings me to another problem. And part of this is hate speech. If we're going to have a better world, human rights organizations have to start talking about hate speech. And they have to stop saying, we don't want to interfere with free speech. I'll go a long way in this country. Let anybody say hate speech, whatever they wish, because others will come up against it. But in countries where there is complete censorship, and the publishing industry is spreading this, you can't sit around and let the hate speech go on. I mean, that's the problem again in Gaza.
Tell me about, let's focus, I want to get your thoughts on what you think is going to happen in Egypt, and because of the government's seeming control of all of the media outlets, what do you think happens there?
I mean, I can tell you my view. I don't think it's any better than anybody else's. I'm hoping that the Muslim Brotherhood will not be powerful enough to take over. I think men like Sid Ibrahim, who is a very strong voice, I hope his ideas will take over, and I think they will. I think there are enough diverse parties. The only fear you have is that the only one that's really organized is the Brotherhood. But there's so many others. I mean, the statistics, the things that I think Egypt has 80 million people, and they say 50 million are under 30.
What about the army in Egypt?
We've talked about that. I don't know. My hope is that the army, they go home at night, and they have wives, children. They're mixing with the rest of the population. You have to assume that they're not living in some isolated place. But armies have, I've always said that you don't need an atomic bomb. Once the machine gun was invented, the people who have the machine guns have a lot of power, and it's hard to overthrow them. But I think this is going well, and I think it's going to open up in the Arab world, and I think that more and more is going to leak into there. And I think that's due a lot to the age we're living in, which is programs like yours.
We're going to leave it there. I want to thank you very much. Bob Bernstein, founding chairman, Human Rights Watch.